So I want to keep it like really casual, and please, I don't want to be the person asking all the questions. So want this to be like a casual conversation. So please feel free to jump in at any point. So I just wanted to get kind of common ground to all your opinions on what you think the stand is. Whether do you think that art is important or an integral part of your architecture, or do you think your architecture itself is art? Where do you see the kind of balance in your practice or your works? Anybody feel free to start. Dean?
So I guess the answer is individualistic. It's how every person looks at a problem. There are architects who have looked at their project as art, and there are architects who have looked at their project as a subject where the art is added. I suppose it's a perception thing, but I can tell you one thing, that architecture can be art, but I think architecture does add a lot of elements into it, which is more than art, which is science, which is your mechanicals, your electricals, your structures. The boring part of the art gets added to the architecture, and that's what makes architecture a little bit more scientific than just art, because art doesn't have limitations, and today we don't have science capable of breaking the boundaries of the certain boundaries, because we have certain limitations which are bounded by scientific forces like the gravity and like the mass, where the art doesn't have any limitations. So I would say that art accentuates architecture, but I think there is going to be a time perhaps where the art and architecture might be seamless.
Dean?
Yeah.
I think it's, you want to take my mic? I think nothing here. This is working. Take
Yeah, a lot of people claim, architecture is an art. But I think it's becoming less and less of an art. We're actually creating, or catering to society like any other service provider. True art has actually been a change maker in society. If you look at, say, what's happened to the arts in Europe, the poets, the painters, and everything, they brought about social change. And as architects, we're not bringing about social change. We can do so much more. Our abilities as people who can understand things spatially, as people who can bring about change, as people who can see the bigger picture and organize things, I think is not being used. And I think our roles as architects needs to go far beyond that. For example, I'm not a trained planner, but I got involved in preparing the regional plan for Goa, and I really saw that as an ability to bring about social change and treat it as something that was needed. So we need to get out of our comfort zones and go beyond, address environmental issues, address social issues, human rights issues, political issues if needs be. And without that, we're not really an art, because art is about change, and we're not really fulfilling that in a way. And I think it's so important to be that.
Yeah. Ravi?
Yeah, I think, an architect was actually brought onto a pedestal only post-Renaissance. Till that point of time, it was very difficult to even recognize what was the kind of genre of how people worked around the idea of an architect and architecture, and how it progressed to become that. But if you go back into our own Indian sort of mythical kind of history, it does say that it's so important for an architect to sort of intrinsically be able to, perform, sing, dance,
all the arts.
draw. There has to be a pinch of all that has to come to you in some invisible layer to be able to be creative to what you do. And I would say that it's nothing to do with just architecture. Any aspect of field, even if you look at German engineering, or if you look at the crafts that you find in vernacular form of Indian sort of vernacular areas of how craft is originated, there is always a layer of art that invisibly arrives into its making. it cannot be devoid of it. Even if you take a sari weaver, there is so much art sort of embedded in making of that kind of an element.
Yeah.
So therefore, you can't sort of disconnect the presence of art as an essence to what you do as architecture. But nevertheless, I think as Dean rightly said, it's a very different sort of variant of how we must practice architecture henceforth as compared to, you quoted Louis Sullivan and you know, some of the yesteryear architects, where composition dominated the idea of its making. Sometimes architects were so consistent in the way they would build. You know, you could see many buildings having certain similar directions and, you know, ideas of making them. So that became a sort of an artistic impression of that architect. Like even when I was with Anant Rajay for a very short period of time, walking around his office, I used to see most buildings had a certain stylistic similarity in how he did his buildings. So, and it was also an impetus of that sense of composition that he was very comfortable with, which was very beautiful. There's nothing to argue against that. But having said that, there was a layer of repetitive idea of making an artistic composition in its making. But today, like Dean said, I think it's a different time that we have to layer social, you know, ideation. You have to layer the urbanity. You have to layer the principles of how we must live. You have to layer democracy. There are so many things that has to come into game. So we must be optimistic in what we want to do, but at the same time, I think be very versatile.
Yeah.
Very versatile and sort of include so many other things in how we make things.
Great.
So there's a very interesting book called Design Like You Give a Damn.
Oh.
And it really talks about an architecture which is responding to society's needs, and art has that freedom, you know, to actually do what you want to. It's a very personal statement. So how can we as architects actually design like we give a damn for things? But of course, with empathy, with the caring for what society really needs. But get out of the conventional, get almost controversial, broad society and into what? I mean,
Give us an example, no? Like what could we do in terms of
so
just for the audience
to give you a positive example of it, there's an organization called Village Well, which is actually an Australia-based organization. They came down to Goa and did a workshop with us. And so Village Well actually has nothing to do with villages or with wells, but it came from actually a rural society where they looked at how design could actually make a difference to get people to actually connect. Because especially in a lot of Western societies, the linking together, the bonding is not. You go on a tube in London and nobody wants to look at each other. So how do you get actually people to start a conversation? So Village Well actually looks at how outside, say, a shopping center, how do you actually create, say, seating for people who malls usually don't have, you know, even proper seating. So how do you create seating which is interactive? A bus stop, for example, they design not a bus stop in a linear fashion, they design in a curvilinear fashion.
So more people-centric.
Yeah, so people start looking at each other, they start interacting. So these very subtle design interventions, they're able to actually set up, you know, connections between people, start conversations, and then they can take on, you know, whether it's political issues or social issues, and that way design can actually make a big difference. And I think it's important for us to actually look at and go beyond just sitting and waiting for a client to happen and put our thoughts together and get things going.
Also, Dean, to carry on with that same question, I know you were early on very influenced by the work of, say, Gaudi, which was very ornamental, and then you ended up working with Laurie Baker, which made you kind of change your approach to a very humanistic way rather than having a more the sculptural form of architecture. How was that transition and your journey through that? Like just your experiences that led to that. Like how did you end up with Laurie Baker?
I would request all of them to keep quiet and maintain silence.
Can the stalls and the people around the periphery please keep your voices down? Thank you.
Well, actually, in college, I love technology and I really enjoyed technology. I thought Gaudi was actually gaudy for me. It was a bit overdone. But when I started practice, I suddenly realized the great structural integrity that he had in his work, and the decoration was actually just superficial to that thing. It was embedded in that thing. And of course, when I got a chance to interact with Baker, I saw this very direct approach to design. You know, it was like design like you give a damn. You know, it's low cost, it's very personal to the client, and it was an involvement and a collaboration between the client and Baker in a way. And that connection is so needed today in society.
It's solving a problem, right?
It's solving a much bigger problem and a new way of building. So our early work, of course, we acted both as architects and contractors and building the work. So that really gave us an insight into material. And I think it's the way we practice today is so disconnected from what's built. We look at specialists to come on every board. We don't really get a view of the bigger picture.
Okay. Amol, I wanted to quiz you a bit on, I know you have a large design practice doing very large commercial projects, and how much attention is given by clients at that scale in terms of making the experience enriching for its user by integrating art or craft, or giving value to very high design, and keeping aside budgets and, the usual requirements of large projects. How do you try and enforce that?
So, more than a large practice, we are a very old practice. We started in '67. So if you look at the transition of our history from '67 until right now, we have seen a major change in the mindset of the clients. We started in an era which was sort of a conservancy, where clients wanted to conserve their money, conserve their efforts, conserve their resources to be able to fit their needs into a certain package. And right now, that mindset is increasing because people are not paying attention just to the essence of occupying a certain place, but various other factors which are playing importance. And so to give an example, probably in the 60s, the clients would perhaps look at a building which would fit just the basic needs of the clients, like a small flat with minimum wastage, etc. Started into clients extending into the landscape areas, etc., etc. So the focus of the living started increasing from just occupancy into certain extended areas. We are noticing right now that from this extension of basic living into other aspects of design, people are starting to appreciate art. People are starting to create, clients are starting to ask about plazas, ask about lobbies, ask about artwork, ask about lighting, ask about areas for showcasing certain things. And that is a major change that we are noticing in the mindset of the clients, which never notice. And perhaps it is about meeting the basic requirement and then humans growing on to the next level, or perhaps clients just being exposed to what is available around the world as a composite project encompassing everything.
But
also.
Does that also carry on to kind of lending the projects to more of a public use? So because you have all these resources.
So I'm talking about public projects. I'm not necessarily talking about private projects. I'm talking about public projects.
So if you look at
the European projects, European projects had those sculptural pieces and art and the plazas and gardens and all those things, in addition to the basic living structures. Whereas perhaps our buildings shrunk in size because of what we went through during the partition, and perhaps that was the mindset that got developed to conserve everything that we had. But today we are seeing that clients are changing their mindset into going back into indulging into certain areas which were never known to our clients.
Ravi, I know that you travel widely is like a highly, like it's a huge understatement, I know you are on a mission to cover like every nook of this earth. And I don't know if many of you know, but Ravi has bundles of passports with stamps from across the world. I just wanted to pick your brains on how all this travel has influenced your work in terms of, your experiences with different cultures, different styles of architecture, vernaculars, crafts, and all of it. How does that kind of...
I think what has made me learn probably in most of this travel, if I have to reconnect to that sort of implication or understanding of how you bring about your experience into the work you do, I would probably frame that all up into experiential kind of work that we try to do. I mean, in spite of having been to, I'm sure all of us travel and you go to many monumental or very large scale kind of structures which come out of autocratic rule or which are dominated by a certain, idea of how the kingdom would sort of ornate it and build. I will not disconnect that there is a huge amount of craft and architecture that is involved in its making. But what actually impressed me in my whole journey was the vernacular, whether it's India or you go to Cinque Terre in Italy or some of the very, very, just a couple of weeks back I was in East Africa, so I was in Ivory Coast and a place called Benin.
So you are traveling all through the pandemic?
No, that was difficult. But I did have to go for some conservation project that they invited me to look at two buildings in Benin. And even in that, sort of a difficult sort of economy-driven country, you see in a sense of that experiential nature of how people habit a space and how they bring, art into it and culture and reciprocation of that culture. I was in this village where they have a temple for pythons because they believe that many pythons help the princes of that particular town, be not eaten by other animals because they were all around her. And they actually have a temple which has 60 pythons inside. And the village takes each of these pythons now and then and pet them and put them back, and that's their god for them. And right parallel to that, there was this voodoo, dance ritual that was happening, and there was a huge square which was formed around it, and somehow the buildings had organized themselves to allow that square to happen. There were these senior and young women who were dancing, and they go on dancing for 2.5 hours till the spirit comes on them, and then they start answering questions. So in all this, there is that, a sort of a connect of how architecture includes these ideas.
The culture and,
So I think my work or my teams and our work has always sort of driven to that direction. I was just talking to you about the Nirlawn campus that we did in Mumbai, which is around 25 acres. And a lot of my friends and also developers, they say, we don't even see that building. Where is that building? It's not like poking in the sky like the Oberoi Towers, or it doesn't have those shimmering sort of shiny glass wall panels. But the last tower that we did, which is around 1.8 million square feet, is a huge box of terracotta. It's a 120 meter tall terracotta, box which sort of sticks out on the edge of the overpass. And if you see this campus, and every time, sometimes I take some of my clients or architects to see or walk around the campus, what is joyous for me that we achieved over a period, we started the project in 2002 and I'm still building. I've not been fired on any of the other phases till date. And we continue to work. And the experience of that landscape, experience of how you arrive, appear and disappear out of the buildings, I think makes that, very
significant.
And it's the pinch of learning that I've seen from everything that I do.
Siddharth, we'd like you to be
it was
part
going
of this
so well.
conversation.
It was going so well.
No, just wanted to know, how does your company take into account, how do you approach your design processes? When you're designing your products, do you involve designers from the fraternity? Do you have a large trained in-house design team? How does your process of design work in terms of your products?
Okay. Thank you for asking the easiest of questions. So this is my first time on the panel. I was sharing with him, and it's a privilege to share the same stage with you guys. So thank you. So yes, when we designed any product, a tile, the team that we have, first of all, the team that we have people from fine arts background as well. We have people from textiles as well. So certain things can be done only by those people. How much ever we have studied, NID, IIM, blah blah, but certain things will be done by that group of people only. And to include them in the team, it's very important. We cannot neglect them for long time. We have to have them on board and to create products which are of course they should be fulfilling the need. Then the art starts. The first discussion that you started, I was so eager to tell this, the difference between art and design. Of course, I know very less from you guys, but how much ever I've understood from the time to time, that first of all we have to fulfill the requirement, then the art starts. In order to give the art, so that's the basic difference. Art is very subjective, what sir was telling, and design is where you first keep other person on your mind, then you add your signature on it. That is what design is. So I think
a simpler question: are architects a pain to deal with? Do they really understand your products,
sorry.
or do they just ask the prices for it?
I didn't understand the question.
Are architects a pain to deal with?
Are architects a pain to deal with?
Architects are?
Are we a pain to deal with?
No, I am an architect. Why would I say yes?
Oh, we didn't know that. Sorry.
Oh, I am an architect, by the way.
So he's fully equipped to. Yes.
Actually, I mean, when you look at art and design, it's all about communication. From art, it's a more personal communication. And art is very provocative at times. It really makes you question things. And I wish architecture was actually as provocative.
As provocative. I also wanted to ask Dean I know your partner Riboni Saha is a product designer. How do you work on bringing these two creative fields? Is that something that you guys, because you can do a lot of messaging, it's products. Do you do environmental signage as well?
I get a lot of flack, from my partner being an architect, because as architects we're in the air. We're always like, I have this intuition that we will do this. I dream it, and I thought of it last night. Whereas in product design, I realized there's far more rigor in the design process. The way you actually design, you prototype, you test. In architecture, we don't do that sort of integrated work with it and a much deeper level. So that really taught me a lot. And of
because
course,
you guys practice together. That's why I was wondering.
Yeah, and of course, product design works at a micro scale of architecture, so that really helps us in detailing our work to a level which most architects really don't go to. So with that aid.
And Ravi, I was also curious to know a little bit about your work with the Madras Craft Foundation and INTAC. How do you promote kind of enhancing skills and craftsmanship and
This was, of course, many years ago, but now we've sort of teamed back with INTAC and doing some work. At that time, it was Nikhilani who actually initiated a small team of us to start doing documentation for both the Madras Craft Foundation to bring in all those little, houses from different parts of the state or even the south of India to be part of one assembly space so people could understand and sort of revere vernacular India. And also during that process, we started realizing that we didn't want those houses to be uprooted out of that place and taken away somewhere else to make it into a museum walk. So there were a lot of conversations as to what should happen of that order. But that again, rigorous work as how we did in college or how we do even today, looking at historicity makes you learn many things intensely, both as the idea to detail and also in its artistic sensibilities. I think that connection is very, very significantly important. And in some of the projects that we've done on conservation and parallels to that, we try and include those lessons. And some of the documentation that we did or the extensions, as I was talking to someone, like I was with a person who came to our office yesterday, working with us on 2 or 3 of the house installations that we are doing of a 300 or a 250-year-old kind of a wooden unit to be transported and extended as a new home before it dilapidates. And he was showing me slides of how he's doing Adi Shankara's house, where he was born.
Oh, wow.
And when you look at the craft ability of this man, he speaks only Malayalam. And his ability to define carpentry, and he would suddenly say a few things, and that would strike a chord. It's just that power of experience and craft that he has mastered over a period of time makes you be able to express that. So I think all of us in some way are in that parallel journey to try and see, and Craft Foundation was of course a great initiation.
Yeah. Dean, you have anything you wanted?
In my own personal journey in art and design, really. So we started this a trust which is called the Kokum Design Trust, which is actually looking at what design can do in the public realm. So we looked at how design can make a difference to people's lives. So we had 2 years ago what we call a social design festival. So we looked at social issues and we looked at design issues and how design can actually make a difference in these areas. So where we're looking at waste, where we're looking at craft. And it was an interesting workshop. And I wish design was fair, since the topic is art and design, is more brought into the public realm, because design is very exclusive and very sort of elitist almost in a way today. It's sort of practiced only in urban areas among the rich, and design is not considered to be at the lower level. So we need to bring design to a level which is far more effective and accessible.
Yeah. So if you were to all give some kind of way forward for how education should be approached in terms of looking at design, but kind of respecting all this and trying to make it more equitable and socially relevant, what would you do different?
My personal experience, I can tell you that I spent most of my life out of the country. I was 17 years I was away. And I spent my younger education here. I can tell you my first year when I went over there to study, my first semester I failed because I did not know how to approach the subject, because most of the exams were open book. And I did not understand the concept of open book because I thought it was the easiest thing in the world. You open a book and you answer, and it was like copying. But it wasn't like copying, because most of those questions did not have answers in the book. Right. And that's where I realized that the approach of education that most of the schools outside have nothing to do with what is written in the book, but more of an application. And that's where I feel we as a society start looking at every problem in a very myopic way, because we see the solution in the book and answer, and many of the societies look at it from outside, and that's why as a lot of things have changed, and that's why many of the societies have imbibed a lot of other areas of creativity into their projects, because they don't limit themselves to just concrete and steel and a box. That has been my personal experience, and most of the companies or practices that I have worked for, the designers have looked at it in a very holistic way rather than just simply solving a problem.
Right. I think we're almost running out of time. If I were to wrap, you want to carry on?
I want to ask you a question, because you partner one of the very well recognized practices doing super nice buildings, and you also you're involved in so much of art, textile, and I keep reading and seeing you being involved in other parallel layers.
Yeah.
So, what is your position when you see craft that will survive the tests of time and see the decades of future moment, whereas the architecture that we all do today is not going to be like the Hoysala temples, it will not see 500 years. I don't know whether it might see, I don't know. But I sometimes seldom think that we've come to an age where we build things which will not survive or be seen or revered as how historicity has held its pedestal. So where
Yeah.
do you see those parallels? Because you have so many layers that work with you in your work.
I think obviously our practice does architecture that's relevant to today, right? Like we don't want to do buildings that don't speak of our time and place and context. We're very conscious about that in our work, but for me, I think architecture to an extent, if it's good architecture, it will remain timeless. Though it's not going to be grand like the temples and palaces of yesteryears, but I think the craft again gets reinvented with our needs today, and also how it can be redesigned, and the craft is still alive, but you reinvent and make it today's use relevant, So I don't think, if you look at everything that's happening, everything old is coming back, and how, So, and I think it's all our responsibility to kind of keep that craft and skills alive, and however we can do it in our projects or work, or promote it in every single way. I think it's good to have those crafts alive. I mean, we struggle to get so many basic finishes now, right? I can't get a good oxide finish anymore. How are we going to do that? How are we going to address that? We can't just say, okay, now there's no skill, let's forget, So I know there are warriors working on this and trying to revive different things, but yeah, I truly believe that, good architecture is absolutely essential, and art and craft can actually only enhance it. So I don't see one or the other. I truly believe that. And all our projects, we always design with spaces that can receive that art and craft from the very get-go. So, yeah.
I think really the long-lastingness of an old architecture, the old buildings, really had art and architecture integrated, and that's where they actually, stood the test of time.
Yeah.
And whereas today we don't have that. We design a building and we leave space for the artist to come
Yeah,
and
to come and
patch
plug
that
it in,
on.
yeah. No, so that's the fight, right? We have to convince our clients that it's worth that investment, and it's part of their lives and their enhancement of daily life, So how do we do that? And obviously to go back to the social needs and all that, that's very large issues, but yeah, however, in whatever small ways. Anyway, to quickly wrap it up, what is one favorite project that does this for you in the right way, and why? Each of you. Yeah, or your own or any other project.
I'm being selfish.
No, you can choose your project too.
Okay, yeah. So of course, the project we
Just
got well known for, which is Nilaya, which is this hotel where we work with a client who is sensitive, and so we work with craftspeople on the project, and we tried to make it as timeless as we could, so integrating really tradition and motifs and everything from the past, and really make it valid to today's lifestyle as well. So it's, in a way we feel that we've got that blend going.
Achieve that, yeah. Amol?
So, if it has to be our project, I think each of our project has been special. We can't really say which one was better or not. But if it has to be somebody else's project, I think I have to say that the Victoria Terminus station in Mumbai is probably one of the best buildings I've ever seen in my life, leave alone anywhere else. And just the thought that went in putting something up like that, that to about 100 plus years, was just astronomical. How the architects integrated art and architecture at that time.
There probably, if I have to start listing examples, there'll be so many.
Pick one.
Each one has a certain essence that you appreciate, and there is such a joy to appreciate that space. But if I have to look at my own little work, so then I think the one which we recently built for Wipro campus, Vijaya Bhargav also was part of that team. She's a super architect, and she's done fantastic spaces with us in that whole work. It's a 4.5 million square feet Wipro campus, and the whole building is completely paneled as terracotta from the outside, and you don't even notice it. Yeah. A lot of people just miss the building and go away, and it's not even seen. But when you walk into that space, there's so much of garden, and we
Nice.
brought many artists to come and present ideas and
integrated that.
extensions, walls and installations, and we constantly changed also the way we did our buildings and plans, including them as we were working by, especially Amitabh Kumar's 2 large wall murals. We changed the whole gorge space to accommodate, Gandhi lifting the salt and Tagore, these are like 17-meter tall mural walls that we did with him. So it is a very inclusive kind of an energy, I think.
right.
That's how Ostraker was there, we were there, Pinch of Gensler was there. And there were so many kinds. It's how we all sort of
Come together.
sailed together.
Yeah.
I think that brought us a lot of joy.
Siddharth?
Yes. So I don't have a long list of projects of
No,
my
one
own.
project. I just want one.
But the all-time favorite is the Guggenheim Museum done by FLW. That is the best project I have come across till now.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we're way beyond time. Thank you so much, and yeah.